I wanted to take a minute today at the beginning of the podcast and say thank you to our sponsor, Huber Engineered Woods. Huber has actually been a sponsor of the podcast since 2020 when we decided to start this little endeavor. Without our sponsors, this content is probably not something that happens. But I think the best part about having Huber as a partner on this is it's an incredibly authentic alignment. Peter, Steve, and I all use Huber Woods. I've been using Advantech Subfloor for coming on probably 21 years now. I've been using Zip System and Zip System with the insulation on the back, the Zip R, since 2013. It's a system that I believe in. That systems approach where things play well together. They have design parameters that allow you to use their system for what you're working on. It works. Their tech support's there. Their knowledge is there. I've never had an issue with their product, and it's a great thing that they've decided to sponsor the podcast. So thank you, Huber Engineered Woods. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. I'm Jake Bruton, and today joining me are my normal co-hosts, Steve Basic and Peter Yost.
Hey there, but describing the three of us as normal, I don't...
My usual co-hosts.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, we can back into that one. The architect and the building enclosure consultant.
Woo!
I had a conversation with Joe when I was recently with him that he said only in America do we call it envelope. In Canada, we call it an enclosure because envelope is something you put in the mail.
Right.
I was just like, that's...
And Eric Burnett from Penn State University used to always, it would just make his head explode to hear envelope instead of enclosure.
Yeah. I think it's one of those, we're going to be fancy, so we're going to say enclosure instead of envelope. How about that? And we're going to discuss that a little bit today about what things can we do outside of the envelope and how it might affect the envelope. So we're going to jump right in. Someone sent an email to questions@unbuilditpodcast. This question comes from Greg. Greg, thank you for sending in. I am an avid listener and viewer of your podcast, YouTube, and Instagram channels. So I think he's talking to Pete there, probably, you think? Instagram? If you want to follow Pete on Instagram. Pete, what is your Instagram? Okay. You mentioned if anyone ever needs advice or guidance to reach out. I'm in the process of framing you. If you want to think about it, you can look it up now if you want. Framing a new home, and I wondered if you could provide some details on how you would build an upper deck with living space below. I plan to have an upper deck on the second floor above a rear patio of living space below over a garage. I'm using Zip R9 on the walls and have 20-inch floor trusses between the floors. I've searched but could not find any videos of you guys discussing this process. If more information is needed, please advise. I can send you a copy of the prints or provide more details. I think we can start with that and probably riff off of what he provided. We have 20 inches of potential space to insulate, and we need to be watertight. I think those are the parameters, right? He didn't tell us where.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with, we haven't covered this because probably, I'm just guessing, this would not be our first configuration of space that we would say, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
To put
absolutely
a deck over top.
Well, it might be on the first of the dumb idea list.
Okay.
Sorry,
that's not quite as gentle to our listener, but yeah.
But it does happen.
It happens.
Absolutely does.
Yeah.
I've done it.
Well, that's
so high.
That's why I'm curious to hear how you did it. But it is interesting that it's over a garage, which is, if you are going to put a space below it, I'd prefer that it be a garage
of low consequence.
Of lower consequences. Yeah. So that's one thing.
I've done it over a garage, and you and I were talking about it over breakfast this morning. You weren't down yet. And I didn't get the opportunity to know that this worked long term. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you and I, Steve, have ever discussed this, actually. This is probably 2012, 2013. The one EPDM contractor in my market retired, and the only other company that did it, the one residential EPDM contractor, the only other company that was doing it at the time was a very expensive commercial company, or we had to hire someone to drive from like St. Louis or Kansas City. And it was just cost prohibitive to do this like 13 by 13 space that these people wanted to like walk out of their master and onto this space over the garage. It was a tuck under garage for like a lawnmower on a walkout on the back.
Mm-hmm.
And we just couldn't figure out how we were going to do this deck. And we were adding deck and the space for the lawnmower at the same time. And finally, one of my guys came up with the idea, and we called the Linex bedliner company. And the guy came out and did Linex on the roof of this little addition that we put on. And it was there for 6 or 8 years, maybe. And then the clients sold the house. Somebody else bought it, and they ripped off that whole end of the house and put on a bigger addition. So I don't know that it was still working, but it did work.
So can we go back? You said an EPDM membrane roof.
Yep.
And so in my neck of the woods, they just call that a rubber roof.
Correct.
There are other options, of course.
When you say rubber, you can buy EPDM that says Firestone on it or Goodyear.
Yeah.
Like it is a weird, like they control that market.
And when you said Linex, we're talking about people that spray line like the truck bed
liner.
Okay.
Yeah. It was more cost effective to have them bring their mobile rig. At the time, they were doing like, we come to you and we'll spray your truck bed liner. They don't do it anymore. And I asked him to do it a second time a couple years later. And he was like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. But it was like a weird, unique solution. And it worked really well because then all we did was we had one framing member that went through, and then he just sprayed up and around that thing. And we like bolted to that. It totally did not meet code. We did the thing without a permit. It was.
And so when he did that, he bonded directly to your structural sheathing?
He did, actually. Yeah. He did a fiberglass treatment to all of the joints and seams. Mm-hmm. And then we had a scupper that was just like a floor drain that was connected to PVC. Mm-hmm. And then he just Linexed to that.
Yeah.
So like none of this was to code. None of it was, I would not recommend doing it, but it was a ridiculous like problem solution. And it lasted at least 6 years, which I'm sure there are people out there building a roof over top of or a deck over low slope roofs that don't last 6 years.
And so when you say low slope, you mean it had sufficient slope to a center drain, basically?
It was an edge, but we still had a parapet around the perimeter so that you couldn't tell that it was there.
So I have a project in mind, but I have to admit I didn't know what the minimum slope was for a low slope roof, and looked it up, and it's 1/4 inch and 12, which seems
that's pretty low slope.
Pretty low slope, but that's
ADA for a ramp, right?
Well, yeah, that's better than ADA for a ramp, isn't it?
I think it's
1/4 inch and 12.
1/4 and 12 is ADA ramp.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know when I should bring in the project that I've currently got in mind. But the other thing is, I have heard folks say, yeah, I'll do this, but only if the dimensions of the space allow me to put down one sheet with no seams. Like if you're going to go beyond that, I'm not going to do it.
I don't want to have to seam the EPDM.
I don't want to have to seam the EPDM. So that was another element of the project. So, Steve, you said you've done this more than once?
Oh, yeah. We've done it a number of times by the ocean. Mm-hmm. So it becomes more challenging. You know, one of the things I would have to look it up, but I want to say when you do decks, you know, first floors are 40 pounds a foot, second floors are 30. I think decks are 100 pounds a foot.
In terms of
structural.
So dead load?
Yeah. And live load.
Live load. Okay.
Our municipality treats them as living space, so it's 40.
Yeah, I know. There's something different
when they inspect, at least.
Yeah, in the code, I want to say it's more because I've had that conversation with their structural engineer, and I want to say it was 100. Because what it stems from is you have the places in like downtown Boston where they have these frat parties and they put 100 people out on a 10 by 16 deck, and then it collapses.
Yep.
And so they make the code such that the thing has to be much higher. And a lot of people miss that. And, so that's a more costly
my
part of it.
My quick Googling here while we're live shows that the IRC looks like it says it's a 40 or a 30.
Really?
And that's probably that's probably a Boston thing.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a good thing because that if you've got a deck, with a great view or something, why would you have that if you didn't want to have a party up there?
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, continue.
Well, and if you get snow on there, it's not going to blow off.
Yeah, that's
you
the
have
other
the rail
thing.
system, right? Yeah. So there's containment there. But yeah, beyond that, most of the time when we would do it, we would put down the rubber roof, and then we would do. They would just do little slope joists, and we would put that on a little skip sheet. So we take the rubber roof and cut it into like a 6-inch wide strip. Put that down, put the joist on it. So there's something there.
Rubber to rubber.
So the wood isn't rubbing on the roof.
Okay.
And the guys I heard of, they call it a skip sheet. So, and then from there, we just put the deck on it.
And is the deck fastened or is it ballasted?
No, it's fastened to those little the little tapered joists.
But it's not bolted through to the roof.
It's not bolted to the roof. And we've done them where like you could pick it up in pieces.
Yeah.
There's
the same way they do those adjusted pedestals and then stone.
So you do 2 or 3 of the rows of tapered joists, and then you can pull it up and you could hose it down underneath or clean leaves and stuff like that out of there.
That's one of the key things I wanted to bring up, which is I have been on these deck over membrane roofs where the thing is fastened. And that's just like, I can't understand how in the world you would want to put that many penetrations to a 1/4 inch and 12.
Yeah.
So in the literature I was reading, they call that it's a ballasted deck, which means it floats, but it is not attached. It's the deck attached to sleepers, but the sleepers.
It's the weight of the deck is kind of just holding it in place.
And so then you have the challenge of handrail though too.
Well, so that's the other thing, which is I've seen them where the rails are additional penetrations at the perimeter of the roof, which if you're sloping it out, which is an option, that's a huge problem.
I got one for you.
We did a really good solution at Farley's house for that. We had a 24-inch overhang. So we put the rail attachment out in the overhang. And so that way, if it leaks in the eave, not into his dining room.
Interesting.
So I did the same thing. There's one that we did in addition near my house that we did
Farley's looks much better though.
We did a pedestal system, and then we did the rail, and the rail is mounted to the face of the fascia.
So if you don't have an overhang, then bolt it to the side.
Yeah.
Not make it penetrate the roof.
And we did it so that the rail were mounted to all thread that's double nutted so that you could swap them without having to take this off at loose.
You said if we don't have an overhang, that takes it from number 1 to like number 20 on the dumb things to do list, right? Let's do a low slope roof with a deck on it with 0 overhangs.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you just open the window, tape the hose to the window and turn on?
You should tell us how you really feel about this though.
I can't. It's a family channel.
So if I'm sloping to a center drain, same thing, Steve, you would do an overhang?
That would be not a preference.
I mean, think of a time where you'd want to slope to a center drain, right? Because if you're putting a deck, it's probably over a family room or over a garage or over a screened-in porch.
Let's take outside water and move it to inside the house. Why would we do that?
Well, let's move it down from 20 to 30.
My answer to that is
There's dumb things
if a person has decided to do a deck over living space, they've already fallen into the category of people that would center drain with no overhangs.
Sorry, Greg.
No, we don't know.
I know you're really beating up on Greg. I've noticed.
I'm not.
Yeah,
and then we have.
I've already responded to him,
and we have heat tape buried underneath the deck that now we have to service that heat tape
around there
because we don't want it to freeze in the gutters. And
okay, so now can I tell you the project that I'm working on?
Sure.
2 weeks ago, I went to visit it.
Dying to hear this.
So this is on a lake in New Hampshire, and full set of plans.
What's the address?
If you look up under lowsloperoofsdon'twork.com. It's a picture of this project. So the owners call me and they say, yeah, we can't get anybody to help us with this. And somebody said we should call you. And I said, all right, I'll come over and take a look. And okay, so we're pulling out the set of plans and we're looking at the roof details. And the first thing it says is slope from the center spine. And by the way, this is a 16 by 12. Is that right? No, it's 16 by 20. So the ceiling joists run in a 16-foot span. And so the spine's going to be in the middle. They're going to be an 8 feet split to each side. And it is supposed to slope from the center of the 16 feet. And this is what it says on the plans. A ½ inch in 8 feet. That's the slope. That is 4 times less than the minimum of the code.
Well, that voids the roof warranty because the rubber roof, I think, is a 1/4 inch per foot for their warranty.
And interestingly, this is a single sheet, and so it's designed to run the water to the outside. The rail system is bolted to the outside of the perimeter. The roof's not leaking. It's leaking at the corners where it attaches to the house, and all the water that goes over the edge, there's a very minimal drip
cap.
What am I looking for? Roof edge drip. And so all the water's rolling right back to the clapboards and not the clapboards, the cladding system. And the cladding system is butted vertical boards. So all that water is just being channeled off the roof around and then in between the boards. And poured into the house.
Because it's not ejecting quick enough off of
there's no velocity. Yeah. But it is amazing. The roof, I tested several places, from underneath using pin extensions, to get up in there. And the roof is dry. The structural sheeting on the roof is dry. But the last thing that complicates this is these panels, which are on the plans, it says removable panels. They are 8 feet by 8 feet. So they're
removable by crane.
Well, it gets better because they're on sleepers, right? So they're like pallets, but the mahogany boards are butted.
Yeah. So you have to lift it perfectly vertical by crane.
Well,
so you need an expert.
First of all, they're waterlogged mahogany, which means I don't know what the load is. You're probably exceeding the load design of the roof without any people on it. Because I tried to, with a pry bar, move one of the removable panels. I couldn't even get it to budge. That's so
why you're
heavy.
Complaining about your back hurting this morning.
Probably. So, okay. She has a set of plans. And I said, well, you're going to have to go after probably the architect and the builder. And she said, yeah, that's a problem. They're both dead. So.
It's one way to get out of insurance.
So she's looking for advice from me.
Real sloppy at the end of my career.
Well, so the first thing is
just nail that chart together.
We can't go up because the patio door that goes out onto this roof is flush. It's not a step down. And so I called the best roofer in the state of New Hampshire that I know.
How many are there?
You bring up a good point there, though. We'll continue, but I've done a number of them, and we've actually have done like a 6 or 7 inch curb and set the door on it. So the door is above the interior floor.
Yeah.
So now you have a step down to the deck. So you don't paint yourself into that corner.
Well, yeah. And I would recommend that regardless, it's in snow country, it's better to have a step down than flush just because, the pile up of snow against there. So it's not, it's really, and this was built in 2010, occupied in 2011. It's a miracle that it's lasted as long as it has. So the question is, I have to change the slope because I've told her no one's going to work on this and you're not going to get a permit at a ½ inch and 8 feet.
Yeah.
So we've got to do something. And actually, it was an architect who told me I think the only thing you can do is, and I'm wondering what you guys would come up with, but I hadn't thought about this and I was embarrassed that I hadn't. He said, you're going to have to take off the membrane roof and the sheathing. So now you got these ceiling joists staring at you. They're 2x12s deep, 12 inches on.
Why
center.
would he want you to do that? If it's all dry, why would he make you do that?
Because his solution requires that we take off the membrane and the sheathing.
What's his solution?
To cut the rafters.
Yeah, you don't have to cut the rafters. Keep going though.
To get that slope.
So you're wanting to increase velocity.
I want to be code compliant. I want to be a quarter inch and 12.
So if you're going to pull the roof, why wouldn't you just add foam and slope the roof with foam?
Just do a slope. Atlas makes a slope poly.
Most EPDM roofs are framed flat and then sloped, pitched with oversheathing of foam.
But I can't increase the height of it at all because of
you have to. That's something you'd have to take the
opportunity to
Can you yank the
shorten
door
the door anyway.
So those are the
yank the door and
one way to do it would be
curb.
But we'd have to make sure that we have the strength in the 2x12, given that it's 12 inches on center. We could do that. We could cut the slope that we needed.
This might be a dumb question, but do they use this deck?
When we told her, my first recommendation was you need to abandon this deck.
Yeah.
And she said, that's not an option.
Okay.
So that's a good point.
Cutting the rafters is going to be more a detriment to their strength than adding a little bit of foam.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I like the idea of, well, if we're screwing with all this, let's go ahead and shorten that door by 6 inches.
Yeah, or just pull it and raise it up. Slide it up
and raise
wall.
it up.
Yeah,
if you can.
You know, it's interesting because I was so focused on getting the slope and the roof. I had told her, I said, look, the only way to do this is to get.
Wait, we didn't talk about what our consulting rate is for consulting with the consultant.
I know. If we're solving Peter's problems at Peter's price,
paid for this,
and he's getting paid astronomical numbers, we are making a killing here.
Oh my word!
And our solution's cheaper than his solution.
I was operating under the idea that we were friends and comrades, and we solve things together. And
wow, he just went to calling us friends so that he didn't have to pay.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave the podcast.
First time I heard him call me a friend in about 20 years.
I had no idea.
But I guess when money's behind,
I would like to hear your assessment of our solution, though.
I like it because I got locked into creating the slope with changing the framing members, and I told her, I said, what you really ought to do is just because you can't touch this roof if it doesn't meet code. You have to take out the door and put in a window, and it's just a good view of the low slope roof. Get rid of the deck. And she said, well, that's not an option.
Get a good view.
And I did tell her, I said, the only other thing we can do is mess with the height of the door rather than mess with the height of the roof, because to get that spine, we're going to have to do something with that patio door. I hadn't thought about basically a box step up to the door because you've raised it one.
Or just raise it 6 inches.
And
so
then
it's just a step up to the deck.
Like a curb into a shower.
A curb, yeah.
Which you could do just a special order door and not have to move the header height.
Well, you're going to love this too. I told her that another option would be to box out a step and then put a drain in that, you know what I mean? Build the roof up and leave it boxed down so that when you walked out flush, but you had to step up onto the deck. And I know that's batshit crazy because.
Yeah, I would rather see it go up. Anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Have a curb at the door. Yeah. Anyway.
But sloping with foam, we talked to somebody or maybe you had walked away. I talked to somebody in Dallas and he was showing me a set of plans at the Building Science Symposium. And he was like, yeah, so we're framing this. And it was this enormous one big room on the back of a house. And he was like, and so it's a low slope roof and we're doing all this. And then the roofer's going to come in. And I was like, why are you framing this at the whole building was this 1 in 12?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why aren't you just framing this flat and then letting the roofer slope?
Yeah, that's how we did Build Show Build Boston. We just got tapered insulation from Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well,
that's a great idea.
He was like, but it needs to be 1 in 12. And I was like, the roofer will slope that with foam. They do that on every commercial project ever.
Yeah, that's
and you
true.
need that foam insulation anyway. And he's like, well, they're going to put 2 inches of foam up there anyway. And I was like, and he was like, the architect owns a roofing company too. And I was just like, what? Like, and it was just like nobody
roofing company.
And it was like it's the architect's own building, sort of like the architect it's not an architect. It's the roofer owns this building. Yeah.
Architect.
The person who drew the building. And it was just like we're going around in circles and nobody here had even stopped to think about we're going to have to put this building together at some point. And he was asking me a bunch of questions and I was just like, this is one of those forced for the trees moments where, and he was like, oh, that'll save us so much time because we're literally going to have to cut 40 feet worth of suds down two sides of a building and then have to an angle on every single one. And then we'll have to deal with it. And I was just like, yeah, this is not the way to do this.
And Steve, Jake and I were talking about this. All the details I've ever seen for low slope roofs have what's called a quote unquote cover board that's between the rest of the roof.
You know, I asked that question to a couple roofers on projects and their replies were the same. Adhered membranes against insulation versus putting in, they don't call it a cover board. It's like a homosoap project, protection board.
Protection board. Okay.
Is what they would call it. It's, at least these guys call it. They said, we don't usually put it in. We would put the protection board in if there was going to be a decent amount of traffic across the roof. Like if you had HVAC equipment up there and people are going up there and moving across this roof and walking across it, he goes, but he goes, if you're putting a roof up there that nobody's going up, he said, I wouldn't.
Because Jake and I were assuming that was sort of a slip sheet or a bond break issue of the membrane to the rest of the assembly. But
just because it's going to get screwed.
It's a protection board. It's saying,
but it's going to get screwed to the insulation and get screwed through the insulation to the deck. Probably. I mean, they don't put protection board, just set it down on top of. Right, because then you'd have
button fasteners.
Right,
yeah.
The joints would, what you call it? You'd see those coming through if it warped or twisted or anything. So you'd have to.
That's interesting.
You'd have to secure it. Why don't you put down 45 minutes there, too, Steve? 45 minutes, so we remember.
Checks in the mail, my friend.
Okay.
I learned recently that TPO is the only one of these, not rubber, but roll roofing products that is warranted to be submerged as well. Like EPDM's not warranted to be submerged underwater. Like basically it's a pool liner at that point.
I didn't know that any of them were, because when my understanding is that if you get these puddles and it's right against the membrane and the sun comes out, you're really pushing the durability.
My understanding is if I have water underneath the roof membrane, I'd probably have bigger problems than the warranty of the membrane.
Yeah, underneath. Yeah.
Okay, so the second half of this question, he kind of implies like he's a little concerned about the insulation values and everything going on here. And I think there's not a question here at all about insulation. Like the fact that you're putting a patio up there or a living space above it, that doesn't affect the insulation values. Your insulation values are still the same as whether or not there's anything up there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like it does not change. It does not affect, like you actually gain something by putting something up there because now you're shielding it. You have a vented over roof type
continuous
situation.
Rigid insulation cover too.
Yeah, that's actually a benefit.
So there's a benefit.
I think what you're saying is it doesn't matter if the roof is almost flat or pitched. The R values required for the roof are essentially the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you are agreeing to make an unvented assembly when you're going to a certain low slope application. And so you have to be more concerned about the fact that you're potentially giving up a little bit of durability, right? But I don't think we have any problems here.
So to summarize, don't do it unless you have to.
Or I would say don't do it unless you're really paying attention to what you're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's number one. The number of penetrations is key. How you do the railing system is a huge part.
Give yourself space. You can't give yourself enough room for those details. They're always one of the problems with those details is there's never enough space. And you're always trying to compress what should be 20 inches of vertical detail. And, we only have 14 inches here. We only have 15 inches. And that just gets you into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do any of it with a parapet either. I've done it with
No.
parapet, and I don't like it.
No.
I would do it all so that it free drains.
That's like, let's put up a dumb idea and then we'll add a dam to it on the
Yeah.
ends. That's just stupid.
And I've done it more than once with a parapet, and it was a pain in the rear.
I think we've helped Greg. You've helped me.
Well, Greg, you're going to
I'm feeling both chastised and better at the same time, which is a very weird combination.
Good.
I think it's like what being married is like.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have this image in my head of being married to the two of you, and I may lose my breakfast.
I think he's just saying anything he can to back out of having to pay us for helping.
No, I know.
I'm cheapest with my friends.
So I got a story for you. Last week, I'm down visiting my grandkids. All right. Granddaughter's about to take off walking. My grandson has come up with a crazy habit. He's chewing on electrical wires.
Like a squirrel.
Yeah. So I caught him. I'm like, what the hell? You're chewing on electrical wires. So I grounded him.
I like that one.
That was good. That was
I like
good.
that
I
one a lot.
grounded him.
I'm shocked that I like that one.
It's a great way.
It was electrifying.
Come on. I'm shocked that I like that one. You're not going to play
I
it
just
this
went
morning?
Right by it. It was the aftermath of
It was
his,
electrifying.
On that note, thank
Do
you,
you see
Greg.
the light?
I hope you guys feel current.
Thank you, Greg, for your
I'm
question.
amped.
Thank you, any dedicated listener that has sat through to the very end and stuck with us. Questions at Unbuild It Podcast. I realize, and we do have to apologize. Peter does answer all of your questions. He does take the time to answer these questions in a timely manner. I'm guessing Greg sent that question to us 10
Greg's
months
probably
ago.
been living in the house for
Maybe
6 months.
10 months
It's
ago.
a relatively
So it
recent
didn't-
one.
Okay, so
Yeah.
sometimes it's 10 months before they get answered and then published here, but Greg did get an answer way back when. So
Yeah, it's my quick cut. But
thank you guys for your questions. Until next time, have a good day.
see ya.
Bye-bye.